Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are setting up my reading wrap-up for July. I was able to read 19 books this month, and I did a little bit something this month which I'll talk about later, but I will discuss more books this month than typical. But 19 was my total for the month, which I thought was pretty good considering everything that I had going on. But I was able to read 3 of my 23 books to read in 2023, and that included The Witch King, which unfortunately was not as good as I was hoping it would be. I only gave it 2 stars, but I gave the 4th volume of Olympus 4 stars, and then The Sun and the Void, which I'll talk about later, was a great debut, but still only gave it 3 stars. And I'll get into that more during my review portion. But adding 19 books to my count for the month of July has brought my total up to 131 books. Before we get further into this wrap-up, I just want to preface that filming this was quite the ordeal for me this time around. I was having a lot of camera issues, a lot of scheduling issues, and obviously I filmed this during different parts of the day and on different days, so my lighting is all over the place, props are all over the place, so I apologize in advance. But yeah, there are some parts definitely missing in this wrap up because my batteries were dying, and yeah, as you can see, it was a bit of a mess and the lighting is all over the place, so I apologize. But moving on to some of my other spreads for this wrap up. I'm adding The Witch King for my W for my ABC reading challenge this month, leaving only a few more to go. My favorite book of the month was Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chipuko. This is a dark fantasy romance with a polyamorous relationship and some very Castlevania vibes. And then for book club this month, our theme was a yellow cover, and while I will admit that there are plenty of books with pure yellow covers, Happy Hour by Marlo Granados is what we decided on as a collective to read for the month of July. But for my Read More Diversely reading challenge, 2 of the books that I read in July were by Latinx and Hispanic authors. I'll talk about those more later, but yeah, overall it was a pretty good reading month. Moving on to the July reads, again I just picked a few of my favorite reads as well as those that are part of some of my challenges, but as I mentioned earlier, I did something a little different this month, and that is I wanted to focus more on some of my Kindle Unlimited reads, so I will be talking about all of those books that I read regardless of their rating. But for July, my stats included the demographics of 12 Caucasian authors, 5 LGBTQIA+ authors or books with prominent LGBTQI+ representation. 3 of the books I read were by Black or African authors, 2 were by Latinx or Hispanic authors, and then 2 of the books I read were by AAPI authors. The genre, again, 14 of the books I read were fantasy, and then I read 8 romance books, 3 LGBTQIA+ books, 3 sci-fi, 2 young adult, and 2 horror books. The mood, again, nothing different. 13 of them had the adventurous mood, 9 were emotional, 7 were dark, 7 were mysterious, 4 were funny, and 2 were lighthearted. And in a shift, because I focused more on my Kindle reads, 13 books were traditionally published, while 6 of them were by indie authors. And then the ratings, I had 5 5-star reads, 9 4-star reads, 6 3-star reads, and 1 2-star read. So like I said before, pretty good month overall. And then this is probably the most diverse in terms of format that I've read this year. I've had predominantly read audiobooks, but this month only 31% of the books I read were in audiobook format, while 52% were in digital format, and then almost 16% were in print format. So yeah, it's just some new things going on in July, which is exciting to see. Now moving on to the review portion, one of the first books that I read this month was an ARC that I received through NetGalley, and that is Darkwater Daughter by H.M. Long. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it, for fantasy pirates, it was really great. This has a unique high seas adventure that combines a captivating premise and a colorful cast of characters, both human and mystical, with a touch of magic that really created an enthralling tale for me. One of the standout features of this book is its premise, which takes the high seas adventure to new heights. The story follows two characters, Mary and Samuel, who manage to find each other in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And the world building in this book is very intriguing, and the magic system is rooted in another world, so it definitely sets up some interesting potential for future installments. Like I said, I read this as a digital advanced copy, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, we have Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I've read quite a few books by her, but I think this might be my favorite just because it's more of definitely a fantasy, because it does involve vampires, but it's a very dark fantasy with some romance. But this book takes place in Mexico City, in a vibrant world that is filled with vampires, and they are known by the humans. The suspenseful plot is one of the book's strongest aspects. Moreno-Garcia weaves a tale of intrigue, danger, and secrets, keeping readers on the edge of their seats throughout as the main character attempts to flee the city from a vampire cartel that is hunting her. And my favorite part of any book is when there's an animal companion, of course. But yeah, Sylvia's the best at making the world that her characters inhabit very vivid and very engaging, so I highly recommend. I listened to this on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. Next up, we have my favorite book of the month, Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko. This was basically a book that had me captivated from page 1. The darker themes in the story add depth and complexity, making the narrative feel rich and multi-layered. The author fearlessly explores the shadows of the human psyche, delving into the characters' fears and desires, and the polyamorous romance is beautifully portrayed, deftly navigating the complexities of the relationship that has you becoming just as invested in it as you would with your more common monogamous relationships. And the connections between the characters are heartfelt and genuine, and I really cannot wait to see how it develops in future books. Like I said before, this is a darker fantasy, so there are some darker themes, a lot of graphic violence, so do read any trigger warnings before going into it, but I listened to it on audiobook and gave it 5 stars. And then next up, we have the 4th installment of Lore Olympus. I've talked about these books before, but I will say that the thing that keeps me coming back is obviously the graphics. This is some of the best artwork in any graphic novel I've ever seen, and I love it every time. But to this installment, we see the progression of Hades and Persephone's relationship and the introduction of Ares. So there was a lot going on in this installment, and I really enjoyed it. I read the physical version and gave it 4 stars. Next up is The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero-Lacruz. This is another e-arc that I received, and this is a debut novel by a Venezuelan author that focuses a lot on South American folklore. Romero-Lacruz crafts a vibrant and enchanting story that draws inspiration from those cultural myths and traditions, and creates like a pretty compelling world. However, despite its strengths, this book does fall short in execution when it comes to pacing and plot. The book's length, which might be approximately 200 pages longer than necessary, can be felt in the pacing and overuse of descriptive narration. This may test the patience of some readers, especially those seeking a more tightly woven narrative. I found myself really looking to see how many pages I had multiple times, and yeah, for me it was a little long, but I think the author did a great job in building this world and some compelling characters, so I do commend her for that. I read it in a digital format and gave it 3 stars. And then next is another favorite book of mine from this month, and that is Wool by Hugh Howey. This is book 1 in the Silo series, and if you are aware, this just got released as a show on Apple Plus, and after watching the show, I absolutely needed to read the book to see what happened, because the show only covers the first 30 chapters of the book, and I will say that, like most instances, the book is better than the show, only because it really delves into the complexities of this. And while the show is probably one of my favorites that I've seen in a while, this book was pretty good as well. And the main character, Juliet, is one of my top characters, I think, that I've read this year. She is a very strong character. Her resilience and determination make her one of the best female protagonists I've encountered this year, and her journey is filled with moments of bravery and vulnerability. And of course, the themes of the book, I think, are very on point for a dystopian novel, so I think it's just very interesting and highly recommend, and I can't wait to continue with the rest of the series. I listened to this on audiobook and gave it 4 stars. Next up, we have one of my favorite authors, Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. I received an advanced copy of this as well, and to be honest, Rachel has done it again. Bring Me Your Midnight is a spellbinding and enchanting novel that beautifully showcases the author's talent for magical story writing. This book focuses on 2 witches who are raised to hate each other but end up falling in love, and the chemistry between them is palpable, and their journey to overcome their upbringing and embrace their feelings is both captivating and heart-wrenching. Rachel's writing style is nothing short of magical. Her poetic descriptions bring the world to life, painting vivid imagery that immerses readers in a realm brimming with beauty and mystery. The fantastical elements are intricately woven into the narrative, creating a captivating atmosphere that sparks the imagination. And really, this book is just another testament to Rachel's storytelling prowess. This book is a must-read for any fans of hers. I received a digital copy of this. I did not listen to it on audiobook, which is what the sticker says, but I did give it 4 stars. And then we have The Witch King, which I said earlier was kind of a letdown for me. I'm a big fan of Martha Wells's Murderbot series, and while Wells has demonstrated her mastery of witty dialogue and complex character development in previous works, this novel unfortunately falls short of those high expectations. The heavy-handed world building, slow pacing, and lackluster secondary characters are all factors that contribute to a sense of disappointment, especially like me, for those who are familiar with her previous work. While the fantasy novel often requires significant world building to immerse readers in, this book really just drops you into everything, and you kind of have to figure it out as you go along. And unfortunately, with a cast of characters who are, in my opinion, quite dull, it was very hard for me to get through. I read the physical copy of this book and I gave it 2 stars. And now moving on to one of my favorite parts of this month, which was tackling my Kindle Unlimited TBR and library. I got to finally read one of my favorite authors, Kimberly Lemming, and the 3rd installment of the Mead Mishap series, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. To me, Kimberly is the queen of book rom-coms. Her romance books are actually funny, from the aloof demon love interests to the snarky main characters, and my all-time favorite, Alexis, the ever-horny magical sword. This installment of the series focuses solely on Dante and his quest to find his mate, who he stumbles upon almost immediately. I would not call this an insta-love situation, but it definitely is not a slow burn romance either. Book 3 has all of your favorite Kimberly Lemming nuggets, but without any sort of outside conflict. Most of the plot revolves around the 2 characters falling in love, but I still gave this book 4 stars. Next up, we have A Kingdom of Venom and Vows This is a fae dark fantasy romance, and it's the third and last in this series by Holly Renee. For a series that started off okay, it took a downward turn, hard turn, in this final installment. Here we have yet another male love interest falling victim to the Castile effect, where by the third novel of the series, this man's entire personality is his obsession with the female main character. For 2 books, this guy was leading his country against the big bad fae, and now that he has his mate, he no longer cares about them as long as she is safe and with him. It just gets old, and I'm pretty sure the main character was a completely different person in this book. And there are a couple words that I swear if I ever hear them again, I will lose my mind. Anyway, I gave it 2 stars. But next we have another favorite of mine, and that is Catherine Ann Kingsley and the Unseelie Duke. Absolutely no one, and I mean no one, can do villain love interests like Catherine. Without fail, she's able to write characters who on paper are so vile and unredeemable, yet you love them anyways and cannot wait for them to get with the main character, because you know it's just going to be so much fun when they finally do. The Unseelie Duke takes place in the same world as the Maze of Shadows series, with our boy Azael and his new obsession Alex, a human witch who accidentally summons him in an act of desperation. The tension between these two is top notch, and then the villainy of Azael is always a good time, and the appearance of our favorite blue-haired king makes this new series an absolute treat. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, we have Bonded by Thorns. It is a Why Choose ACOTAR meets Mandalorian fantasy romance. And yes, I said ACOTAR meets Mandalorian. And if you read this, or if you have read this, you know why. But this is basically a Why Choose Beauty and the Beast retelling, where our main character Rosalina must venture into the Fae realm to save her father from a life of imprisonment by making herself or take his place, and then in order to win her freedom, she agrees to help the princes who inhabit this castle find their mates in order to break the curse that currently controls them and their magic. Of course, we as the reader all know where that is going to go, and absolutely no expectations are subverted in this book, and I doubt they will be in subsequent installments, but I still had a good time, and there is some good MF and action to be had. Next up is the second book by Petra Palermo, and again, I apologize for these long titles, I did not make them up, but all I wanted was to become a scientist, but now I've got an alien boyfriend. Book 2 find ourselves focused on Jesse and Grayeth, 2 characters that we meet in the first book, and their relationship after a few months of living together. We still get to experience some external conflict and an introduction to other parts of this world and the customs of this alien planet. I liked getting to know how the humans are adapting to their new lives, and I absolutely loved Gray's sarcasm. Highlight of the book, I could do without the insanely long titles though. I gave it 3 stars. And then last, we have Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. This is a contemporary romance that I picked up purely because of this cover. How could you not? I thought it was so funny and cute. But it is the first contemporary romance that I've read in a while, and I actually did like it. There was some insta-love going on. This is a cowgirl romance set in Wyoming. But basically the girl comes home and falls in love with the bad boy cowboy, and while a lot of this book didn't really make sense to me, the romance was sweet, the spice was spicy, and the potential for future books in this world is definitely there. This does take place in rural Wyoming, so there is absolutely 0 BIPOC or queer representation, so skip this if those are must-haves for you, but I did give it 3 stars. And that concludes my wrap-up for July. thanks again for joining me today, and again, apologies for all of the technical issues. I had a lot, so hopefully August will go a bit better. But if you're interested in seeing any of the other books that I've read last month and throughout the year, be sure to follow me on Goodreads, which is linked below in the description. But if you liked what you saw, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for any future videos that are coming up. And in the meantime, happy reading!